Thank you, Ray. And before I start the conversation with Ray, if you'll indulge me for a moment, I just wanted to make a comment because I think it might be seeing you today. It's been a number of years since I've seen you in person, and it made me think back to 2010 when I first had the opportunity to come to Bridgewater, get the Bridgewater experience, and to do an interview with you. And I remember heading back to New York City after that meeting and thinking, this is a different type of firm, and that you were a different type of leader. And as someone who has, at that point, spent 20 years, now 30 years, at the helm of a magazine called Leaders Magazine, and interviewing thousands of leaders in business and government, it always bothered me that the word leader was overused and had lost its meaning, and it was around financial success and the power of a title. And for me, it's about purpose and meaning and significance and impact. And seeing you tonight crystallize for me on that ride back, that was what we talked about then, and that's how you've lived your life. And the world could use more leaders like you, so I just want to thank you for all you've done and for all the impact you've had. That's just an aside. Going back to Ray, you mentioned, Ray, earlier your son Matt, who went to school in China at the age of 11. What you didn't mention is that experience that Matt had in China in many ways was the starting point for the enormous amount of philanthropic work you've done in your life. Can you describe that journey and the impact that had on you?
Yeah, certainly. Matt went to the school there, and then when he was 16, he was going to high school, and a friend was, somebody in our neighborhood was trying to adopt a Chinese child, and had some problems, and he said, maybe I could be of help. His big advantage was he was 16, he spoke the language, and they were sympathetic with him, so he was able to go into the orphanage system, and he saw that most of the orphanage children were special needs children, the unwanted. We always think of them as girls. And he learned that for $500, he can make surgeries and support things. And he came back, and he asked neighbors. He raised $70,000, and he asked neighbors, and he went back to China, and he got involved, and that ended up putting him in Oprah Winfrey's show, and it ended up being over the next 12 years, he set up operations, and he did a lot. And I didn't really have any involvement with philanthropy. So Matt, this then 16-year-old child, brought me through the orphanage systems and brought me in that regard. And I'd just gotten to the point that I had enough money that this was an important thing. And so he taught me about the pleasure, the necessity, but actually the pleasure. Because when you look at the children, or you look at the people who are benefiting, and you look at them in the eyes, and you think how lucky I've been, or we've been, it becomes something that becomes compelling to do. And so he taught me. And so philanthropy really came from his involvement in China, and also then the activities which we continued since then.
What made you study and write your new book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order? And can you talk about really the messages you wanted to convey in the book?
Yeah, I learned a long time ago, I've been a global macro investor for about 50 years, that many of the things that surprised me in my lifetime were things that just didn't happen in my lifetime, but happened many times before. And so there were three big things that are happening in our lifetimes that haven't happened in our lifetimes that I needed to study. And so those are the amount of creation of debt and the printing of money that has financial consequences through the system. The second is the amount of internal conflict between the left and the right as a result of very large wealth gaps. If you look at how large the wealth gaps are, you have to go back to the 1930s. If you look at the political gaps, you have to go back to 1900 to find we're at odds. We have a war going on internally with ourselves. And then the third was the rising of a great power to compete with the existing great power of the United States and the existing world order. The Soviet Union was never an economic comparison. And so in order to study those, I needed to see the cycles. What makes empires and dynasties rise and fall. So I went back in the Western world for 500 years. I studied them carefully. And then I also studied the dynasties in China since the Tang Dynasty, so about the year 600, and these patterns. And I saw the same patterns happen over and over again. And it's compelling. It's a situation that we should understand. And so I felt that I should take this study, which I was doing to make my decisions for the next year, 2, 3, 4 years. I needed to pass those along, and that's why I wrote the book. And I understand every one of you will be getting a book, thanks to CGCC.
When you look back to that study of history and the way you do look at history as you make decisions going forward, when did that develop?
When did I first do it?
Yeah.
Okay. I was clerking on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in 1971. And so I just graduated from college. That was August 15th, 1971. The Nixon defaulted on the United States promise to give gold in exchange for dollars. And so back then, money, paper money, was just like checks in the checkbooks, and real money was the gold. And he said to the rest of the world that you're not going to get the gold. And I went down on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange thinking that there's going to be pandemonium, a real crisis. And it turned out the stock market was up a lot. And then I studied history, and I found that the exact same thing happened on March 5th, 1933. Roosevelt did the exact same thing for the exact same reason. But I never experienced the devaluation before, and I didn't understand how the value of money changed that. So I knew that I needed to study important things that happened in the history, so I studied the Great Depression. And because I was able to study the Great Depression, I understood it, I was able to get the 2008 financial crisis. So the idea of this happening, so many things in history happening over and over again that we miss because we just didn't experience, it created a necessity for me to do that.
You've described yourself as being at a third phase in your life as you transition from running a business day to day and spending more time doing the things you enjoy most. What are you most looking forward to in this phase, and how has the transition been?
Yeah, I think there are these 3 phases. The first phase, you're dependent on others, you're learning. Then others become dependent on you and you're working and you're trying to be successful. And the transition phase to the third is to pass along the things that have been valuable to others to help them. So that's what this transition phase represents to me. In another year or 2, I will go quiet and I'll be done with this. But and then I'll be in that third phase. I'm very excited about the world, and I'm very curious, and I have a wonderful family, so there'll be much to enjoy. But there's something that comes to this phase in life in which you don't want to be more successful yourself as much as you want to see the success in others and make sure you pass along what you've got.
Just 2 or 3 more. When you look back, Ray, at Bridgewater, this is a firm that has had great success, great longevity, great impact. What do you attribute that to, and how critical were principles and culture that you built there to its success?
Well, culture is destiny. You know, it's the most important thing. What I would attribute it to, well, we have one goal in one long sentence. It's to have an idea meritocracy. That means may the best ideas win out through radical truthfulness and radical transparency. In other words, we'll talk about anything, things that people would find difficult, how good and bad people are performing, and all those things. Try to get at people's strengths and weaknesses to help them be successful, help us be successful. So, an idea meritocracy with radical truthfulness and radical transparency, with the idea of having meaningful relationships and meaningful work together. If you're on a mission together, and you're radically truthful with each other, and you can get better, then you're in better shape, and I would attribute it to that. I would also say that whatever success I've had in life has been due to more to my knowing how to deal with what I don't know than anything I know. I've learned a lot, but what I don't know is so great. And so that has come my learning from others, triangulating with others, and knowing how to diversify my positions.
There are many in this room, there are young people in this room, there are those who have kids who are starting out their careers. This has been an uncertain and difficult time. As you look at those young people today, what would you tell them about the future, about what to do in an unprecedented time as they begin their career and try to build a sustainable career?
Learn from your mistakes. I believe this to be true. Pain plus reflection equals progress. That if pain is giving you a message, and if you calm yourself down when the pain reflects, it'll tell you something about how the world works and how to interact with it to be more successful. So escape the notion that being perfect, being smart, knowing that you have it all in you is the sign of success. That's wrong. It's the opposite. You will go through your journey, you will make mistakes, and through that mistake learning and that open-mindedness, you will gain your strengths. And there's only one thing you could do, and that is to be strong, because it'll come at you.
And just lastly, Ray, you're known to be an optimistic person, half glass full. We hear today everywhere we turn about crises around this world and challenges ahead. Are you still optimistic about the future, and what do you see ahead?
I see that we all have the capacity, if we deal well with each other, internally, the rich and the poor, the left and the right, the Americans and the non-Americans. We have today more resources at our disposal than we have ever had, and more creativity through technologies and the ability to learn. And there's a basis for being prosperous and having a good society, better than ever before. It all depends on how we are with each other. And it's a cyclical thing. You know, we talk about the big cycle. None of us have been through a war. Anybody who has been through those types of conflicts knows how bad that is. So that if we have the capacity in human nature, I have an expression, if you worry, you don't have to worry. And if you don't worry, you need to worry. Because if you worry, you will take care of the things that you're worrying about, and if you don't, you won't. So we have that capacity. And so that's why also I'm so happy to be here today with all of these people and talk about American-Chinese relations, because that will be the most important international relations in making a good future.
Well, I want to thank you, Ray. I want to congratulate you on the award, and I want to thank CGCC for putting this night together and for all the impact that they make, and have a great rest of the night.
And thank you very much.